Axon is a proud supporter of the ACD and has truly enjoyed our partnership. Our underwriters have gone beyond industry standards, working with members and their brokers to bring insurance coverage exclusive to the ACD. We understand the chemical industry. We listen to our insureds, we leverage our experience, and we specialize in providing comprehensive and competitive insurance solutions.
Since 2017, Axon has worked with ACD leadership to address exposures unique to members. This has resulted in a program geared specifically towards you and includes enhancements like 10% credit applied to policy premiums, reimbursement of responsible distribution fees up to $5,400, around-the-clock emergency response services, and expert claim resources.
To learn more about Axon underwriting, visit us at axonu.com.
Welcome to Chemline, Inside the Chemical Distribution Industry. I'm your host, Eric Byer. Each episode, we take on topics that you need to know as they relate to the chemical distribution industry and how they could affect your business and even your everyday life. Chemicals play a pivotal role in modern civilization, and we invite you to join us as we dive into the challenges and innovations that ensure the safe and efficient distribution of chemicals wherever they are needed. In this episode, we're diving into the critical issue of shipping and labor strikes at the ports. What impact do these strikes have on our supply chain? How can we mitigate these disruptions? And with the looming deadline of January 15th, will the International Longshoremen Association and the U.S. Maritime Alliance reach a new labor agreement, or are we headed for another strike? Joining me today to discuss these pressing questions are three great industry experts. Carl Bentzel was nominated by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate to serve as Federal Maritime Commissioner in 2019. Commissioner Bentzel plays a pivotal role in shaping maritime transportation policy, rail and pipeline transport, hazardous materials handling, and homeland security. He was a principal in crafting critical legislation, including the Maritime Security Act of 1996, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998, and the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002. John Gold is Vice President of Supply Chain and Customs Policy of the National Retail Federation. John is the primary spokesperson for the NRF on matters related to supply chain, international trade, product safety, and customs. A leading advocate for the role of trade in the U.S. economy, John has served on several high-level government advisory committees, including the Department of Commerce Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness. Lorianne LaRocco is a senior editor and global supply chain reporter for CNBC Business News. She coordinates high-profile interviews and special multi-million-dollar on-location production for all shows on the network. Her specialty is in politics, working with titans of industry. Lorianne has been with CNBC since 2000, earning the trust and respect of Wall Street leaders and Washington insiders alike. So with that, Carl, John, Lorianne, thank you all for joining us today. So let's get right into the conversation, gang. We were talking a little before we hopped on here. We've obviously got some pretty critical deadlines coming up with January 15th. Carl, I'd love to get your take as to how we kind of got to this point and looking at the agreement that was established a few weeks ago to kind of kick the can down to January 15th as we're just a few days short of the inauguration. So can you give us a little flavor there as to how we got to that point and then what maybe you see going forward?
Sure. Before I get into that, I just say I'm a commissioner right now for a couple of days left, and taking a position as the executive director for the National Association of Waterfront Employers. So the employers are the people that are negotiating with the labor unions for new contracts. So I have a little bit of a perspective from inside the government and outside as well as I transition. So the labor negotiations are different for cycles on the East Coast and the West Coast. East Coast negotiations are with the ILA, covering everything from Maine essentially down to the coast of Mexico, usually on about a 4-year cycle. And so this last round of negotiations encompassed a time of extreme upheaval during the shipping during the pandemic, where we saw imports of 27% increases, and the shipping lines, the customers of the terminals made extraordinary profits, and so it was contentious negotiation for the first set of issues, which was basically how much you paid the longshoremen going forward. And so on the side of the longshoremen was a commitment to continue to support the trade during the pandemic when they were not, they were deemed essential personnel and suffered, losses while on duty, moving cargo. On the other side, you had the shipping lines that had basically been able to profit from the congestion that was caused during the shipping. So the first set of negotiations, White House directed the Secretary of Labor and the Secretary of Transportation to work on getting the parties to the table, and they did. They were successful at the end of the day. And there were substantial increases in pay for the longshoremen, although there was some delay. I think it's 4 days, 5 days, but the magnitude of a potential strike is huge in terms of economic interests. And so the first phase of the negotiations was completed with an agreement on wages going forward. And so we're entering into the remaining issues that need to be negotiated, and that's really technology issues related to long-term contract terms, which I think are going to be either 4 or 5 years. So I'm not positive, but we are pending resolution, hopefully, of an agreement by January 15th, when the indications are from the labor union that they will go on strike in the absence of an agreement.
Okay, good deal. Lorianne, you've covered this at length, whether it's this strike, other port strikes, both rail side, ports, you name it. I mean, you've seen a lot of different strikes going on, and boy, they've been coming fast and furious over the last few years, it seems like. I mean, I'm surprised Carl still has hair on his head. Give us your 10 cents on this as to how you see things working out. I mean, you've seen how we got up to the at least the kick the can agreement, as I like to call it. What do you see happening between now, January, and even moving forward?
I really think that they're going to strike. I mean, Harold Daggett is very straightforward. You know what he wants, you know what he doesn't want. And based on the letter that he wrote back, right, in response to the New York Post article, the rhetoric that you're seeing on the ILA history, Instagram sites, Facebook sites, their line in the sand is no automation. And so Daggett, as we all know, he did get, his another year or two, right? But he wants this larger worldwide labor union, and it's all about anti-automation. And so they demonized it. But it's interesting where he parses modern technology, where it's okay to have computers put in the bill of lading because you're able to move the containers more, but I do not want to use a crane that's automated where it's operated by a joystick. And that, as we've seen with the productivity. So I think it really depends, but I think when it comes to what's happening, I'm not shocked. I think he's going to go for a strike. It depends on what Biden and the administration do there. I've been speaking with the acting labor secretary's office, and they're hands off. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what relationship that Trump truly has with Daggett.
Kind of scary because here we are. What is it? December 9th. This will probably air in a week or so. So the holidays are almost shot. You're not going to have people negotiating. Julie Sue's not involved. Labor's not involved. And then all of a sudden you turn that clock, and then the next thing you know, it's all about here comes Trump 2.0. So, John, I guess my question for you is, the swamp as well as anybody. You've gone through this stuff. I mean, salty dog is a term of endearment, so take that as it is. Give us your thoughts here, knowing what Lorianne just talked about. You've seen some lines being drawn the line by Daggett, no doubt. What do you think is going to transpire? You got Trump 2.0 coming in. What do you see coming down the pike here, especially as we turn that year into 2025?
Yeah, I mean, look, we are significantly concerned about what's going to happen going forward. As you noted, we've got about a month before the contract expires, and the parties aren't talking to each other. They came together, had a day and a half of meetings. It's not as if they didn't know what was going to be talked about on the table. And the fact that they walked away, I mean, look, the only way they're going to get a deal is they get to the table and talk and stay at the table until the deal is done. Walking away saying, taking my ball and leaving isn't going to get a deal done, unfortunately. But it's concerning, the fact that, again, we're 4 weeks out, they're not talking, don't know what the Biden administration is doing. They're, continuing to monitor the situation as they did for a year leading up to the strike. And, this is going to put President-elect Trump in a really tough situation, because if they go on strike on the 16th, that's 4 days before, his inauguration, the cabinet's not going to be set at that point in time. So, his hands are going to be kind of tied as to how quickly he's going to be able to act and actually do anything to put an end to a strike. So, we're certainly having conversations with, Capitol Hill, encouraging them to continue to talk and put pressure on, talking to the transition team, continuing to talk to this administration. They're really setting us up to start the new year in not a very good place when it comes to our supply chains, because it's not just the potential for a strike that we're dealing with, but ongoing supply chain pressures that we're facing. We've got Lunar New Year coming up. Everybody's trying to get product in earlier. And oh, by the way, we've got the threats of potential tariffs starting in January as well. So there's a lot of pressure, not just on my members, the retailers, but I know, Eric, your members as well. Everybody's going to be, it's really concerned about how we're going to start off, 2025 when we look at our supply chains.
Yeah. I mean, we had our annual meeting a few weeks ago, and just talking to the folks that were there, you knew that the stockpiling / front loading was happening, just because you just don't know. With the Lunar New Year being January 29th, the fact that you've got Trump coming in and you don't know people are saying he's got a good relationship with Daggett and he could handle this one-on-one behind closed doors a la Tony Soprano. I mean, fine, that's great if he can do that, but we can't count on that. And so, people have got to do their very best to make sure the warehouses are full to keep the customers happy. And that's a real challenge. I mean, it scares the hell out of me, to be frank with you, that we're in this point now with the holidays upon us. Carl, I mean, as you transition out of FMC, get back, into the private sector, the concern as a business that's trying to bring product in and keep the customer happy. I think John hit it right on. It kind of scares the hell out of everybody, that the unknown and that finite window of time between the 15th and the 20th. I mean, it almost seems like a strike is going to happen, period. Like there's not even an argument, especially since they're not negotiating. What's your take?
No, I'm a little bit surprised because I have good connections in the labor industry, and at a local level, it seemed that things were looking pretty rosy. I was down in Houston at a conference, and so my perception was that things could be worked out, and usually things on technology are worked out at a local level. And Lorianne's comments about automation, it's rhetoric. We're not looking at automation at U.S. ports. We're looking at new technology to make better, efficient use of the equipment that we have. And so space is constrained at U.S. ports already. And so they need to have additional technology to create more density to allow ships to come in faster. So I actually believe that in the absence of technology, will be less efficient, and there'll be less jobs, less opportunity for labor unions. So I'm a little bit surprised at the tenor of conversation, because it's really about attacking a fully automated system as opposed to implementing something that's going to have generate more business. The Port of New York, for instance, is so tight right now that with in the absence of some additional railroad cranes that are automated, you're not going to get as much cargo into that terminal, and you're not going to have as much work for that workforce. So my perception had been that it was okay, and now it seems to be a political issue as opposed to an operational issue. So I hope they can get back to negotiation and talk about real issues as opposed to just hiding behind rhetoric.
When it turns into political, obviously it gets pretty interesting, especially as a conversation piece. And so I'll open this up to all of you. Maybe we'll start off with Lorianne here. The idea of, is there a happy medium between no new technology and having technology? And it seems like Daggett's like, no. And obviously the terminals and the carriers want to say yes, but is there a way to say we can do this over a 5 or 10 year period where we bring it in, we see a whole bunch of the union guys retire, which is, I guess, going to be the case. Is there some happy medium there where we can say, let's look at this not only from a 3-year, but maybe even a 10-year perspective, where they can phase out potentially, bring in new technology, realize that certain jobs can be retired permanently, but we can still have everybody working harmoniously. Is that doable? Is it possible?
I don't know. I mean, just because, when I was at the ILA conference, the meeting, before they struck, the tone and the tenor and the energy in that area, there's a lot of anger. And so when there's a lot of anger, we all know that people, you can't base decisions on emotion. There's a lot of emotion on all of this. From a common sense perspective, doing a timeline does make sense because, they need to recruit younger people. And so I've been speaking with sources on, the USMX side, and they're equally entrenched as well. I mean, both of them are pointing fingers. Both of them say that they're wrong. And so, I asked the USMX source, well, is there data to prove that when you automated over at the Port of Virginia, that no jobs were lost? Because that's the poster boy for the Daggets, is that, they were not in charge when Virginia got the cranes.
Right.
And if they were in charge, it never would have happened. And so I have yet to really find any type of proof. It does make sense to see where there are shades of gray, but as of right now, there's so much bluster on both sides. It's like this horrible game of chicken. And like John pointed out, there are so many headwinds right now facing importers that you don't know between the rhetoric and the bluster. But if Trump does enact tariffs, and I know all of you guys are talking to the lobbying groups and the attorneys out there, it depends on how President-elect Trump triggers the tariffs, either immediate or ones where it opens up to negotiation. And we're not going to know that until the 20th. But we all know right now here, and for those listening, if you wanted your stuff in before an immediate type of tariff, your stuff should have been out on the water a long time ago. So I don't know how everyone is planning, but I can tell you based on the data that I'm seeing, there is not a lot of front loading going on. There's bluster on all sides, including shippers saying that they're front loading. I've seen the data. They're not. Inventories are bloated.
Interesting. John, what do you
I
think?
mean,
Any
look,
happy medium idea there?
There has to be a happy medium. There's got to be a path forward that addresses this for both sides. I think any technology and automation that comes into the system needs to be done in partnership. Management just can't bring it in alone. They've got to do it in partnership with the ILA, because you got to make sure it works for everybody. And it's not just between management and the ILA, but these systems need to work for the other stakeholders who rely on the ports as well. They've got to work for the truckers. We would love to have an integrated appointment system that works for everybody to make it a whole hell of a lot easier to move through the system, but we don't have that now. That's what we need. And as Carl mentioned, the ports are so full right now, we've got to find better ways to manage the system. And bringing in automation technology that works for everybody and is done in partnership is going to help us to do that. And oh, by the way, the technology and automation is going to not just make you more efficient, make it a safer operation. And you know what? It's going to move things quicker through the system, potentially bringing more cargo and more jobs to the ports as well. And guess what? Increase container royalties, get more money for labor as well. So there are ways to do this. But again, if they can't get to the table and sit down and have an honest conversation with each other, then it's not going to happen. So whether they can do it on their own or bring in an outside mediator to really help them get to where they need to be on these issues, we need them at the table. And again, until they have the conversations and can agree on a path forwards, whether it's a 5, 10, 15-year time frame, let's just do it. But again, things aren't going to happen overnight when it comes to technology and automation. It's going to take time to do that. You're going to have to test. You got to figure out what works best, depending upon what port and what terminal you're talking about too, because not everything is going to work for every port or terminal. So it's really going to be dependent on those local issues. But again, if they're not at the table having that conversation, we can't get to an end game here.
So, okay, Lorian talked about the idea that they're not talking, and we're hearing that maybe there's some back channeling, but there's no direct conversation
Nothing
between the two
formal,
parties.
yeah.
Right, exactly. So we get to the January 10th, 11th, 12th. I mean, do we see another kick in the can, giving Trump another 90 days, 120 days, you think? Because, I mean, it seems asinine to me that you would want to put a president come in, yeah, he's already got 4 years experience, but you put that on his back with a strike happening for 4 or 5 days. That's lousy. I mean, I don't care if you like Trump or not. That's a tough spot to be put in. You got to think they'd do some kind of an extension. Even Daggett would agree to that. I mean, what do you guys think about at least a short-term extension?
Unclear. I mean, look, we certainly hope so. We hope that, it seems that, President Trump and Daggett have a relationship. Hopefully they're having some conversations and, President Trump can let him know, this is not going to put him in a good spot to start out his next administration.
Yeah.
As you kind of noted, last thing anybody wants to do is start out with a supply chain crisis on their hands
Right.
At the beginning of an administration.
Right. Agreed. Carl, what do you think?
Well,
Short-term extension?
They may have had one extension already. They negotiated round one, and so it really is up to the labor union. I tend to think the threat of ordering them back to work doesn't work that well. Ultimately, these are skilled jobs, and you can't just supplant the workers there. So I think they have to get back to the table. Maybe he can prevail upon them to accept some sort of mediation, just to keep things going. But it seems to me that both, I would say labor won some ground during the last wage negotiation, and this issue is what I perceive as playing in their favor. I mean, there's a general perception, I think, that automation is not great for the U.S. population in general. Unfortunately, this is not an issue of automation. It's about technology and jobs, job gains, loss. I think the labor roles have increased during the time frame that the two facilities that they're looking at have automated in a general sense. So I don't think they're really even discussing the issue. So maybe that's what they want. They want a strike to put more pressure on.
Lorianne, you get the final say on any kind of extension. What do you think?
I don't think there will be an extension, and Daggett's been very consistent with his words and moving forward. In September at the ILA meeting, he said that if there was Taft-Hartley invoked,
Right.
that they would intentionally slow down and it'd be very, very, very congested. And honestly, I think that a slowdown is just as horrible
Right.
as the closure, because look what we saw
Agreed.
with the slowdowns over on the West Coast.
Yeah, that's a great point. The Taft-Hartley deal is sometimes forgotten when you talk about all this stuff. So, well, look, I think I've got a great solution. Gold and I will start lobbying for Special Envoy Bensel, since he's going to be in the private sector, but could still do a detail for the government to solve all of this. He sits down, he has conversations with all the right parties, gets it banged out before January 15th. We're good to go. So, Carl, what do you think? Take that job?
You know what? USMX is part of my new association, so I'm going to continue to defer to them to do what they're
such
supposed to do.
such a political response, Bensel. Come on now.
I'll help behind the scenes, but won't get my head cut off. So I'd like to say I'd love to be in a labor management negotiation as much as I'd like to have my head put in a grinder and ground through 3 times. So.
Eric, I think we just need a beer summit and lock them in a room and say they can't come out until the deal is done.
Exactly. And that's sometimes the best solution in Washington. There's, as sad as it may sound, it is sometimes the very best solution, which is crazy. So, well, look, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the three of you coming on and talking about this. Hopefully there'll be some resolution between now and post-holiday where there's some momentum, whether it's on extension or a permit agreement, and Carl being in the mix or not. Hopefully they'll get to that conclusion. Big thank you to you guys. I hope everybody enjoys today's conversation, and please like, subscribe, or leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast, as the old saying goes. You can find us on social media at Alliance for Chemical Distribution on LinkedIn and at ACD_Chem on Twitter, or X as they say nowadays. I still say Twitter. Don't hesitate to reach out to us with story ideas, questions, or concerns. We can be reached at communications@acd-chem.com. And for now, we'll catch you on the next episode of Chemline. Thanks so much, all.